All right. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Roy, VP Product at Symmetrics. And today we have a very interesting webinar topic, even though I'm sure pretty much every webinar will say that at the beginning. But um, the webinar title is New Era for Security Data from Gathering Points to Creating Stories. What we see in Symmetrics, and we usually work and talk with many different companies and organizations, mainly with the different personas within the security organization. Actually, starting from the CISO and security leadership, GRC teams, and also sometimes the security operation teams, because eventually we need data, and we'll get to that. So we do need more technical teams as well as part of this process. But what we see today is that many of these the different personas from the security leaders and CISOs all the way to the security operations and more technical teams, they struggle almost every day with different questions that can really vary between the use cases and your position. But question like, if I start very high level, things like, are we secure? Are we compliant? Did we improve how our security programs are performing? How are we against this or that threat? Questions are questions every day. The way we see customers handle this type of challenge today is by addressing the questions in a very, let's say, not standardized way. So I would say, if I have to list the challenge that we see with answering these questions, one, it's very manual and complex. Every question that I have, I would need to start this process that we have here again and again. It's very time consuming because there is no automated way to do that. Every time it's very manual. It's very ad hoc. So every time I need to, answer a question, report to someone, analyze something, I need to start the process again and do it as I'm doing it for the first time. Sometimes we do see like a knowledge gap because this process, which I'll explain more in the upcoming kind of webinar, it requires different skill set. First, you need to understand what you need to answer, how to collect the data. Sometimes this requires even analytical skills, which not every security team will have, or maybe they need like resource from different analytics team. So there is some different skills that required to collect this, to build this puzzle, and to collect all the pieces. And even if you have that, then you need to have another skill set on, okay, I have an answer. How do I visualize it? How do I translate it to the different stakeholders within the organization so they will understand what we need? So I think the biggest problem is I said it for the last, is that it's not really standardized. This is why the title we thought would be interesting for the webinar is that I think today we see many organizations really focused on collecting the different points, this number or that number, this number of hours, this policy, this framework, but it's very hard to take a step back and try to understand what's the bigger picture, or create a method that will help us understand the bigger picture. Because we think that if you start actually from the picture and what you want to discuss and answer, then you go into the data, the answers will be much more accurate and much more eventually actionable, and will actually provide more value for the entire organization. Now, the problem that we see is that then customers take the approach to two different ways, because there is no standard. Sometimes they say we figured it out, and then when they need to report to more senior level leadership, they say we are a 7 out of 10, we are 70%, we are A, B, different kind of methods. And then the feedback is that, wait, but it's too little information, like we don't understand what you're saying. Then they need to think about like a new method. And again, since there is no organized and methodological or framework or standard, then they need to think again to take this process again across the different SMEs and different people within the organization. They need to reiterate and do it again and again. And then what we see is that they usually take it to the other direction. So then they say, provide many different types of metrics and data and information. Then the feedback they get is that it's too much. And now it's too much information. You provided, before too little, now it's too much. So what's the right answer? Now, what we see customers are doing, or the main reason they are investing in collecting data, working with the different SMEs or owners within the organization, we see it into two different buckets, kind of the main value drivers. first on the left side is they want to measure their security organization, the performance, the effectiveness of their security programs of the teams. They want to measure how the organization is against different frameworks, rather if it's something they need to that is required as part of as audit or maybe internal audit or internal policies that they have. Some customers are taking from a risk perspective. They want to assess risks in the organization or threats. They want to understand which threats in the out there can translate into risks within the organization. So and also they want to measure their tools to this to evaluate ROI, to justify, or maybe they want to purchase something. But we really see these items on the left side is like the key areas that customers kind of want to measure. And then once they have this information, usually they want to take it to the next step and then do something with the results. And usually the action is to report on that, to track and report on that. This can be for the leadership, to the board, to show how the security organization is performing, what are the actions that we need to take, what are the gaps, and what are the next steps. Also, it's important to report with all our findings on the left side, also to the internal teams. Maybe I'm collecting this information. I want to have a high-level understanding of the different kind of performance and effectiveness and everything here, and then I want to communicate it with our teams, with our security teams, vulnerability teams, identity, etc. Also, last point is that sometimes I want also to have a good reporting mechanism, or to be able to report and communicate with our auditors. Obviously, we are required to pass an audit, different frameworks, whether it's like CSF just for the concept or something more strict. But we want to be able to collect data and measure different areas to be able to communicate better with our auditors. I think the word report, even though I chose it here, is a bit more, that's like the dry word, but I would say the main reason they want to measure and to understand how they are performing against all of these items on the left side is to improve the communication. Because once you have more information and you understand better how things are actually working and performing, then you can communicate with different stakeholders on a different level. It really change the communication. And again, it's less about a communication about like why you did that or why we're that. It's just more to really understand what are the gaps and what are the best next steps that we need to take or that we should take to improve next. So what we see, honestly, when we ask customers, okay, how do you implement all that? Usually the answer is that we have built or we want to build a security program. We've built a security metric program, and then there's different answers on the maturity. Some are just started with that. Some are more advanced and mature, already have something. But usually this is the main answer. So at least with that, we do see a consensus that they understand that in order to provide and measure all these areas and to improve their ability to communicate and report, they need to have a metric program behind the scene. But then it gets a bit tricky because what we see is that on paper, building a metric program can sound much easier than actually implementing it. When we ask customer, how did you identify the metrics that are needed, the points that you need to collect in order to create your the different stories and reports, then usually the answer is that we have basically Google, Gartner, consultancy firms from our friends. This is usually the answer. So again, there is no like standardized ways on what we should measure, and this is just the first step. Then then the question that they ask, okay, we build this metric program, but how metrics can even help? Because sometimes you kind of lose sight. You start, really digging into the metrics and data and numbers, but then wait, what am I trying to achieve? So I think this is exactly the challenge, that you sometimes start with the bigger picture, and sometimes you start with the metrics, but we see people, customers are like, when they get dragged into the building the metric program, then it starts to get a bit to be a bit complex and messy, and you kind of lose what you actually try to do because you're into the details too much. But I definitely think, and this is obviously what Symmetrics provide, and we'll talk about that. Metrics are really the foundation to build really good stories. This is why it's important. It is important to identify what are the stories, what are the ideas or questions or answers that we want to communicate and report. But it's also very important to have a very good foundation layer that will allow us to have a very good stories on top of that. I think that I try to find an analogy for metrics. I think that I found that puzzle is a very good analogy for that, um, because metrics to me is really like pieces of a puzzle. You can have many different pieces and you can build them in a different way that the picture or image at the end of the puzzle will be a bit different. And then you can, once you have the pieces, you can choose how you want to connect them in order to address what you need. If you want to report or create a story that will resonate with more higher level or management or report or the board, then you need to build like a certain puzzle and show it like that. If you want to communicate with more internal teams, GRC, compliance, security operations, then you need to build the puzzle in a different way because they care about other things, more technical, less technical, different point of views. So you really need to have a good metric program and a metric program that will be adjustable and flexible. So I wrote from my perspective based on working with many customers, and so far we've seen many different Excel spreadsheets and BI dashboard and metrics. From my perspective, this is the key components for having a good metric program, or what is required to have good metrics in general. First, they have to be continuous. We often see customers invest heavily with building metric program that is like one time, and you put all this investment, and then okay, what happens like after a month, after a quarter that we want to measure progress? Then we need to do everything all over again. So it really have to be continuous and automated as possible. Also, it has to be actionable. We see this is actually we did this mistake when we just started with Symmetrics, but we added metrics. But then the question that we got very early on is, okay, this is the SLA, this is the number of people failed the campaign. Is it good or bad? So essentially, the question was, what good looks like. So it has to be actionable. It has to be against something. It can be against our policy, framework, threat, risk, anything of the items that I mentioned in the beginning. But we have to put like a target, KPI, threshold, different names, different meanings. But it has to be actionable. Also, I think one of the most important areas is that we need to make sure that metrics are contextualized, because metrics by themselves can be really misleading. If we report and we aggregate the data and report on what's our vulnerability management status, open vulnerabilities, remediated vulnerabilities, there is many things inside the data that can really change the answer and can really change the scope of what we're trying to communicate. And this is why metrics must be contextualized. And by contextualize, the main thing I mean is to be able to apply the business logic on the metric. If it's to apply, the business units on the metrics, if it's to apply critical environments, critical assets, owners, combine data from multiple sources into one metrics, it has to be contextualized. Otherwise, we see that the metrics are pretty useless. If we just measure something without really apply the business context, then it's not really valuable. Also, we have to have historical information. We do see that, especially when we want to communicate as we go higher with communication and reporting. Usually, the questions are, okay, how are we performing right now? How are we performing against previous month, quarter, year? Depends on the time frame that we report, and what are the next steps that we need to improve. This is why we have to show progress. It's not enough just to show a number and that's it. And last thing is that it has to be flexible. And flexible, what I mean is that this is more related to the pieces of the puzzle. Eventually, the metric layer can be, very similar. We need to invest in one metric layer, but it has to have the ability to change based on the image or the story that I want to build. So sometimes maybe I want to keep the metric high level and show all the organization. Sometimes maybe I want to talk with a specific team, so I want to slice it based on one business unit. Sometimes maybe I want to just see my critical environment. So really, it's really important to make it like flexible as possible. So I think this is like the main thing for me to build like a really good metric program. Once you have that, then this really, once you accomplish that, you pretty much accomplish a very, very good foundation layer for building many different stories, variations, and your ability to create stories will be even you're able to adjust and create stories almost on the spot once you have this kind of figured out. this is why, from our perspective, Symmetrics, it was very important for us to build as the foundation layer, to build something that is very powerful and automated as possible. So what we did is we started with integrating with many different security tools, ticketing systems, SIEM-DBs, every tool that can possibly help us kind of improve and provide really good metrics. We can connect to that. So we build like a data fabric that is based on all the security tools and all the data that we can connect to. This is step one, and this can address the automation part, because we don't want to maintain, regardless of Symmetric, just as an organization, we don't want to rely on questionnaires or manual work every time we want to create a new report or a new story that we want to communicate to any like stakeholder. We don't want to do it every time again and again. So we need to make sure that this is something we collect continuously. Second thing that we did is that we provided more than 100 out-of-the-box security metrics once you connect to Symmetrics, because one of the challenges that we identified is that for some organizations, it's hard to start. Like the question is, where do we start? What's important to measure what's not important to measure, because not everything is important to measure. So this is why it was important for us to not just provide an analytics kind of capabilities and integrations and automation with that. It was also important for us to provide our opinion on which metrics should be measured for every one of the items that I mentioned, like the programs and threats and frameworks and all that. So this is also something we want to assist our customers with how and what should be measured. And if you see this one example from one of our metrics that kind of combine correlation from different products, it pretty much has everything in that, because first, it's continuous. We can connect to all the different tools and make sure it's continuous. It's actionable because we measure it against a policy or a framework. It's also contextualized. It's important for us to correlate data from different sources and apply context. Like I want to see only critical assets, not all assets without endpoint protection. It's like a classical use case. Also, everything is historical. We keep track on the data and make sure it's saved and that we can report on our progress. So this kind of summarizes our method on how to accomplish the requirement that I kind of defined and discussed about on how a good metric program should look like and how we kind of implemented that. Then the next step, regardless if you did it like by yourself, manually, BI dashboard, or with Symmetrics, now that we have, let's say a good understanding on how a good metric program should look like, and let's say we accomplish that, then we can start play with this kind of pieces of the puzzle to build different stories. So I think that the best way to build a story is that kind of I divided into 4 different pillars or areas. One, I don't know. I was when I was a kid, I was taught that if you do a puzzle, you need to start from the frame and not just randomly start with collecting or kind of the pieces. You need to start with the frame because this gives the frame of the picture. So this is also how you should start a story. Not start with the data and numbers. Start with what you're trying to accomplish. What is the goal of this report, communication, story that I want to build? Then once you have that, you need to list questions before starting with the analytics and analyzing. First, define the question you want to answer with your story. If you're talking about a story, if you are compliant, I'll give a few examples. Obviously, list the questions that are important to answer. Then also define the audience. Audience really will change the entire kind of flow and communication that you're doing. Because if you're reporting to technical, non-technical, compliance, risk teams, this can really change pretty much everything in the story. And lastly, which the area that we covered pretty much so far, is the metrics. Once we have the framework or the frame, we identify the questions, we figure out who is the audience, then we can say, okay, for this to achieve that, I need these metrics. So it's almost like picking out of a pool of metrics. Okay, for this story, let me take these 5, 10, and then put everything together on the screen. And again, the reason that I started with the metrics and not with the story, even though here I suggested the opposite, is because once you have the metric side, then everything else becomes much easier. Because what we see is that defining the metrics and really building the metric program, this is the heavy lift. This is like the hard part. Once you figure this out with Symmetrics or by yourself, this becomes much easier. Now, then here I wanted to provide a few examples of different stories that we've built, some by ourselves, some together with our customers. That this is how they kind of envision how like stories that they want to tell or report, and we thought it's really good, so we kind of implemented that in our story and solution as well. So let's start. Story number one, this is, I think, the most common request that we are getting. I want to tell a story of how my security programs are performing. I want to assess their effectiveness. I want to assess their performance, kind of different wording, but the goal is the same. So if you talk about the framework that I provide, the frame, I want to report and communicate on how our security programs are performing. The main question I want to answer is if our security programs are effective or not. This is the question. There are many questions under that, but I try to keep it like high level. But this is the main question. Then the audience here is less focused on like management or board or executives. This is more internal within the security organization for security leaders, for GRC teams. They want to make sure maybe we enforce their policies on our programs. But this is more, let's say, within the organization, not like outside the security organization. And then what we need to decide is what metrics are need to be implemented. Now, at Symmetrics, we did the same drill before defining this. At Symmetrics, it's like basically will be a templates or boards. I don't want to get it too much into the Symmetrics kind of jargon, but what we did is we did the exact same drill. We said, okay, this is our goal. This is the question. These are the audience. Now let's build a visual for that. Let's kind of build a flow on how this should look like. So this is from Symmetrics kind of product. We show, what's your score, and then how the different security programs that we provide out of the box are performing. So this should provide the answer for this specific question. This is how our program is performing. This is the score right now. This is how the score it was improved in this case compared to the previous month. This is basically our method of visualizing the story. And then if we go kind of one level deeper, and I think I provided the deeper level in this example because all the other kind of examples, this is the nice thing that we can reproduce that. We can reuse the metrics for different things. But here, if I'll focus on security awareness, for example, behind the scene, it's a set of metrics. Time to report, reporting rate, phishing failures, user failures, different type of metrics and measurements and numbers and data that we define automatically, and we connect again to the tool automatically to be able to tell the story. So again, we can think about a story like top to bottom or bottom up. The right approach that we took is top to bottom, but actually the presentation here I started with the metrics. So if I'll do the opposite, we have the ability to create these metrics automatically and against the different connecting to different tools. Then we can bring it to the high level with summarizing everything and show you how you are performing. So this should provide the answer on how your different security programs are performing. And one quick note about the scores, because we always get a question about the score. The score is what I meant with actionable. Eventually, you need to assess your programs, metrics, anything, frameworks, you need to assess it against something. In this case, we define a security policy that what good looks like for every security program. And the score basically represents the gap between the desired state to the actual state. So this is just a quick note about the score because you'll see it more in the upcoming slide. Story number two, this is something that we get many requests about, is how do we report to executives? Like we get like, show me the magic button. I want to click on a button, then send it to the executives. The answer is that it's possible, but you need to have a really good metric layer or really good metric program to do that. So the frame is that we want to show to our executive overall status and progress of our cybersecurity organization in general. The question that we'll probably get, are we secure, which is like very vague, and how do we answer? Are we vigilant? Are we resilient? Are we compliant? Are we safe against this threat? Things that are very like artillery, right? Like high level, but we can't reply, yeah, that's like too high level. We need eventually to provide an answer. something that will resonate with, the specific stakeholder that we want to communicate with. So and then usually for this type of high level, the audience will be our peer, like as a CISO, the peers, other C-suite executives, or the board members, like management. And then eventually, obviously, it gets to the metrics. What we discovered is that we are 7, like as at the beginning I said, it's not really enough, but also too many details is not enough. So we kind of actually together with our customers define a really good a template on what you should report to the board, and then it really varies between board members, right? Because not boards are really can vary between different organizations, so there is no magic report that will feed them all, but there is a good starting point. There is a good way to, if we are not sure, if we're 20% sure, we can help to get to like 80%, but then you need to adjust it based on your specific requirements and based on the Zoom level you want to communicate. This is very high level, showing like how we are performing against everything that we do in security, and then answering few questions if we are secure, compliant, resilient, and vigilant. And then if this is good enough for them, we can also show what are the gaps and findings and next steps. In addition to that, if that's good enough, we can then move forward. If more information is needed, then we can drill down and use the same method as before to provide more information. Usually this is good enough, but again, sometimes in like when there are specific use cases or when something on the news, you want to focus on like one area more than others, and you want to get to the details, you can definitely do that. You can choose, okay, here I want to dig deeper 1 or 2 levels down. So this is the idea. Third story, very popular. Obviously, something that is required, even if you're not required like to do like an CSF. We see many organizations are following the CSF framework just to make sure that internally they're doing things the right way, at least according to CSF. We know it's not enough, but it's a good start. So the story that we see is that we want to assess our maturity against NIST. We want to make sure if we are compliant to that, and this is mainly for between the GRC teams, the CISO, and the auditors. Other teams can be affected by that, but this is like the main audience that we want to discuss. In this case, we actually build a set of metrics, because again, metrics are like evidence. If you do evidence collection to assess your framework, your maturity against NIST or CIS or any other framework, eventually it goes down to metrics. So in this case, we have, as an example, one of the boards or templates that we have can measure your performance against one of the NIST frameworks, one of the CSF kind of categories and subcategories. But the nice thing is that just the text here and the filters on the metrics are different. The metrics, I can take them and use them to assess my endpoint security, my asset management program or project. So this is exactly the nice thing here. I'm using the same metric, the same set of metrics, different filters and different kind of point of views, but really I'm reusing them to do the same to do different stories. 1 second, sorry, something is stuck here. Okay, no, not my side. All right, let's skip some. And then another example is that we also can then provide an overview. Sometimes when we want to report to leadership and management, okay, this is how we are. This is our CSF assessment or maturity level right now. Without getting into all the numbers, more for maybe the GRC and internal teams, we can also create a report out of that, like a summary of that. And again, using the same metrics, the same data, build a different story, more high level. So it's really about controlling the zoom level, zoom in and zoom out on the data that we want to explore. And from our perspective, it's very important to provide this kind of ability within Symmetrics. Last example here, story number 4. This is more technical. I started with high level, right, like compliance and executives, but then it goes more to the technical, because I wanted to emphasize here that with metrics, you can do all. You can talk high level, you can talk really low level. So vulnerability, for example, if we want to measure a vulnerability program specifically, maybe the question is, how do we improve our prioritization? We have many vulnerabilities. We want to improve prioritization, and we want to work with the vulnerability management team, communicate to the CISO, and also with the GRC teams to make sure we are aligned with the policies. And from a metric perspective, Then it's much more operational metrics, as we know. Open issues, detected, remediated, collection of metrics that we can apply out of the box that will help us assess and improve our prioritization. The main reason we can improve prioritization, I'm sorry, is because is the part that when I mentioned about the contextualization. Since we can contextualize metrics very easily, then we can say, okay, this set of metrics that measure open issues and detection and remediation, which are very high level, we can then apply context from other tools. Then this kind of can improve the prioritization and tell a different story. And then I can say, okay, show me this set of metrics against a set of 5, 10 different business units, against my critical assets, against this line of business. Really kind of apply this context on the metric in an automatic way is important to make sure you can tell the right story on your vulnerability management program. And again, I took the vulnerability as an example. Obviously, other programs will use the same method and same flow as I presented here. And then I didn't really want to go. I could probably go on more and more stories, but I just want to provide like the main thing is that I wanted to show that there is a method, there is a standard that is important. We developed, but it's important if you're doing it by yourself. It's important to create a standard, because otherwise you will report different stories every time. You will not know if it's working or not, if you should improve. So it's important to. I hope this kind of assisted with defining the method and starting with the big picture, and then define the questions, and then audience and which measures should be collected. And also, I hope that I emphasize the fact that what needs to be done to build a really good metric program and what's the value of the metric program. Once you have that, besides the story that I mentioned, many things can be achieved. Then you can take the metrics and build them in a different way that can help measure our readiness for a specific threat. Because if we take like ransomware or insider threat or phishing, even if we take it as a threat, behind the scene, it's a set of metrics and how they are performing. Risk management, we can define different risks. If our tools are utilized, other frameworks than NIST, really flexible with what we can do. Since we know it's really, there are many options, sometimes too many options is not a good thing because you can kind of get lost. So from our perspective, this is why it was important for us to provide many things out of the box. So I think if you start and you're doing it by yourself, define, start slow and not start with like, let's measure everything, because then it will probably be not a good exercise. So I would suggest focus on one or two different stories, make sure you kind of understand and you kind of have kind of figured out the entire flow and how you're doing that, if you have the right people, resources, SMEs available, understanding with the security tools, understanding what should be measured, understand how to visualize and how to report on that, and then you can kind of copy paste this method to other areas within the organization. But once you do that, again, this can be replicated across different stories, stakeholders, and different kind of use cases. So I think to me that was important to emphasize that, because we really see today in the market that customers are really focused on the metrics. They actually start with the last part here, and then it's very hard to connect the dots, because you have this set of metrics. Okay, what do we do with that? Let's send it as a report. Let's communicate with this stakeholder and move forward. But we're losing the big picture, and we're eventually losing the story that we wanted to narrate. And this really not a good exercise from what we're seeing. I think basically that's it. Before I'll kind of share more information, a bit more information about Symmetrix and how we can kind of follow up. Any questions from the crowd? Let's see if I see questions here. If you have a question, feel free to send them, even though I don't know how to see them yet, but I'll figure it out in a second. All right. I think it's all right. So I don't see if there's any question. If you want to follow up, obviously, and if you want to ask something personally or offline, obviously, we would be happy to do that. This is my email. Feel free to reach out, and we can kind of work together, even regardless of what we have done. We'll be happy to share our experience and expertise working with many different organizations, different sizes, different personas on how to build this method. Once you have this figured out, you really build like a machine of a story generator. I just see one question here. I just need to figure out how to see it. 1 second. One second. I'll stop sharing and see if I see the question. Yeah. So I got a question. How easy is going to be customize this and build new reports? This is a very good question. So from Symmetrics, we build it in a very flexible way. We had two main kind of missions. One is to provide many things as possible out of the box. So we didn't want customers to connect to Symmetrics and see like empty screen and then figure out what you need to do. Many things out of the box, you can get a good starting point. We do see customers that are more mature or becoming mature when working with Symmetrics. Then they want to build their own metrics, their own boards. This is something that very easy at Symmetrics, basically creating a custom board, mix and match between metrics that we build or creating your own metrics from the data sources. But it's something that's very simple. We try to really simplify and enable the access to the data, because data can be, data needs to be collected from different sources. Each source, each security tool will speak in a different language. Here they call it like critical. Here it's like B. Here it's 20. It's very hard to normalize everything. So we do the heavy lift of normalizing everything into Symmetrics and then allowing you to basically, if you don't want to use the predefined, you can explore the data and the metrics and then build your own metrics and then say, okay, Symmetrics provided open issues, but I want to filter open issues only for internet-facing assets, assets that are not dead, assets for the specific business unit, click apply, and we have a new metric that we can start track and report on. So that was the long answer. The short answer is that it's easy. Right, let's see if we have any more questions. Not sure. All right. I think pretty much that's it. I wanted to keep it like simple, even though it's 40 minutes. I'm not sure it's considered as short, but thank you for listening, everyone. Again, if you have any questions, feel free. I'll share my email one again, just to make sure if you didn't miss it if you want. But we'll be happy to continue the discussion. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.